Greetings, everyone, Muslim, non-Muslim, ex-Muslim, and everyone in between. It's been a long time, but I'm going to move on from readings in Asbaab Nuzool number 5 and bring you number 6. We're going to talk about outside sources and apostate scribes and deal with the particular verse where Muhammad acknowledges outside sources but denies any influence. And so the drink of choice for tonight as I'm going through this, I've got the Tanqueray, some mineral water. I think I've had a little bit too much, but hopefully as I go through this, it'll sober me up a bit. So I want to cover 4 areas here. I want to talk about first the Bashar verse. I want to talk about the Sabab, or the reason for the verse from the Hadith and Tafsir Sunni scholars. I want to talk about Ibn Qumta and who that is, and maybe some significance. And then I want to talk about a topic that will be leading me into future videos in the area of language, and that is the phenomenon of paraphrasing that we find in the Quran. And so beginning with the Bashar verse, it is from Surah An-Nahl, which is chapter 16 of the Quran. It's verse number, or ayat number 103. The verse in Arabic is وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ إِنَّمَا يُعَلِّمُهُ بَشَرٌ لِسَانُ الَّذِي يُلْهِدُونَ إِلَيْهِ عَجَمِي وَهَذَا لِسَانٌ عَرَبِيٌّ مُبِينٌ, which would be translated as in, we surely know that they say no one is teaching him except a human, but the man they refer to speaks a foreign tongue, whereas this Quran is in eloquent Arabic. Now, one of the things that used to come up whenever I read the Quran, there's always, when we're looking at the reference in the Quran, there's always confusion with, in particular, those references that are pronouns, with who's being spoken about or referred to. And I'm thinking about, in this instance, for example, na'lamu hum yaqulun, yu'alimuhu, and ilayhi. And it sparks these questions, bigger questions of who is the we talking? This one is a little bit easier to answer because, well, if you're a Muslim and you're ultra religious, you're going to say the na'lamu means we, Allah. Christians have always found the we usage problematic and have said, oh, there's evidence here for the Trinity, whereas modern Muslims will have said, no, that's the royal we. For me, when I now read the first person POV, whether it's plural singular, I automatically think this is the Allah persona of Muhammad in his writings. But not so clear as who is the they say, or who is the Bashar teaching who, and what is that foreign language that's being referred to here. Another thing that used to strike me strange when I would recite Surah An-Nahl, I always felt that verse 103 was a little bit out of place with the previous verse. Not so much with 104, but there just seemed to be some kind of abrupt going from one topic to another. And so what I put here, I've noted a couple of things, or rather 3 things that I want to talk about here. And that's that ayat 102 and 103 in my readings of when I do qira'at, or recitation of the Quran, and contemplate and do some tadabbur and tafakkur, contemplation and reflection, the 2 are not very cohesive topic-wise. And to me, instantly, they refer to 2 different things. So let me just translate. We saw the translation for 103, but for 102, قُلْ نَزَّلَهُ الرُّحُ الْقُدُسِ مِنْ رَبِّكَ بِالْحَقِّ لِيُثَبِّتَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَهُدًى وَبُشْرًا لِلْمُسْلِمِينَ, which would be translated, say, the Holy Spirit has brought it down from your Lord with the truth to reassure the believers and is a guide and good news for those who submit to Allah. Now, there are those who would argue that they are cohesive because of, one, the wa wal atif here that we see in wa laqad na'lamu in 103 is a conjunction that's connecting 102 and 103. And also because the Quran is filled with stories of angels talking in foreign languages. And for me, that really, lughatan, language-wise, going back to what I'm saying here, they're not cohesive topic-wise. If we examine the first part of the phrase in 103, it's saying, and indeed we know that they say he is taught by a Bashar. The key word here is Bashar. And Bashar, as used by the Arabs, means a human being. And the Arabs would use Bashar in a unique way. They would say with the pronouns, huwa Bashar, he is a human being. Hiya Bashar, she is a human being. Or even hum, they are Bashar, human beings. Or huma Bashar, they too are human beings, even though there is a dual and a plural form of Bashar. In the Quran itself, you'll even find, Antum Bashar, you all are human beings. And the word itself, Bashar, always means a human being. It doesn't mean an angel. And there is some level of polysemy to Bashar. For example, in Surah Al-Mudathir, we have Lawahatun lil Bashar, which is the blackening of the skins. So Bashar here doesn't mean a human being, it means the skin of the human being, as the scholars of tafsir have explained it from the aspect of language. And I know that there are going to be those who say, well, the angels did come in the form of human beings. So for example, I'm looking here at Surah Al-Hud, that comes to my mind automatically if that were to be said. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَتْ رُسُلُنَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ بِالْبُشْرَى قَالُوا سَلَامًا قَالَ السَّلَامُ فَمَا لَبِثَ أَنْ جَاءَ بِعَجْلٍ حَنِيذٍ. And surely our messenger angels came to Abraham with good news of a son. They greeted him with salam, with peace, and he replied, peace be upon you. Then it was not long before he brought them a fat roasted calf. فَلَمَّا رَأَى أَيْدِيَهُمْ لَا تَصِلُ إِلَيْهِ نَكِرَهُمْ وَأَوْجَسَ مِنْهُمْ خِيفَةً قالوا لا تخف إنا أرسلنا إلى قوم لوط. And when he saw that their hands did not reach for the food, he became suspicious and fearful of them. They reassured him, do not be afraid, we are angels sent only against the people of Lut. Now this translation is taken from Quran.com, and the text in Arabic doesn't say angels per se. The word for angel would be singular, would be malak, plural would be malaika. And the text says rusul, which is plural of rasul. And so if one were to use the argument that, well, when angels come down, they come down in the form of human beings based on this story, well, it's not using the word bashar to describe them, it's calling them rusul in the plural, it's not calling them bashar. And we know that there is a difference between a rasul that's a malak, a messenger that's an angel, and a rasul that's a bashar, right? A messenger that is a human being. So for example, if we look at chapter 14 of the Quran, verse 4, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ لِيُبَيِّنُوا لَهُمْ, that we have not sent a messenger except in the tongue of his people so that he explains to them. This shows that the angels that are sent, or the human beings that are sent, always speak in the language to the people that they're sent to. And so here we could surmise that these angels are speaking to Abraham not in Spanish or Latin or Swahili, they're speaking to him in Hebrew, in his language. And that you don't see that in this verse here, because as I said, it's saying innama yu'allimuhu bashar. He is being taught. They say he is being taught by a human being. And then what comes after that is this next phrase is interesting. Lisanu ladhi yulhiduna ilayhi ajami, right? The tongue of the person that you're referring to is foreign. So the Quran has nothing in it that says angels speak foreign tongues to the people they're sent to. And so there's those two things. The Bashar is explicitly talking about a human being, and the language is explicitly talking about a human being who speaks a foreign language, because the contrast to that first part of the phrase is وَهَذَا لِسَانٌ عَرَبِيٌّ مُبِينٌ. This rather is a clear Arabic tongue. And so for me, it's a weak argument to say that that is talking about angels, that 102 and 103 are connected, because topic-wise, they're not. It's very clear that 103 is talking about a human being. And we're going to find out as we go through the Asbaab what prompted Muhammad to construct this particular verse to respond to the allegations of what they're saying to him. And then one last thing to consider is that if we did tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran and try to match 103 with all of the others verses and surah of the Quran for that argument that I have here, then there's no connection with Ayat 103 and any other verse that clarifies these grammatical reference as we look at them, okay? Now, with that linguistic aspect out of the way, I want to, in number 2, it's going to be just a little lengthy, so just be patient. I am not going to read all of the Arabic, just some areas that I think where it's relevant. I'm going to stick to most of what I've translated or have used from other translators. And what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be taking from 7 different Sunni ulama of Hadith and Tafsir. And I'm going to start by the earliest all the way down to the latest based on dates of death. And so I'm going to start with Al-Bukhari because he is the first one who mentions or gives reference to Ayat 103. And if you excuse me, I just need a sip here. Oh, that's nice. This particular hadith from Al-Bukhari is an interesting one because I find that it's kind of like a template for other scenario types stories that sound similar. And maybe the scholars of hadith use those stories and inserted other names or other situations. I mean, it's probable, even just looking by the language itself, this refers to a lot of other people. But here's the narration here, the first one. And it's narrated by Anas. I'm going to read the Arabic on this one because I think it's important because we'll see those themes repeating itself. It says, كان الرجل نصرانيا فأسلم وقرأ البقرة وآل عمران. That there was a Christian man who converted to Islam and he would recite Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2 of the Quran, the cow, which is the largest of the Quran, and Ali Imran, which is number 3, and it's also the second largest of the Quran. فَكَانَ يَكْتُبُ لِلنَّبِي, and he used to write for the Prophet. فَعَادَ نَصْرَانِيًا, and he went back to Christianity. So he left Islam and went back to being a Christian. فَكَانَ يَقُولُ, and this particular Christian man, he used to say, interestingly, مَا يَدْرِ مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا مَا كَتَبْتُ لَهُ. Muhammad doesn't know anything except what I write for him. فَأَمَاتَهُ اللَّهُ فَدَفَنُوهُ. And so Allah caused him to pass away and he was buried. فَأَصْبَحَ وَقَدْ لَفَطَتْهُ الْأَرْض. It says, so in the morning when they came across his body, the earth had spit him out. فَقَالُوا, And so his companions, the Christians, they said, هذا فعل محمد وأصحابه, that this is the action of Muhammad and his companions. لما هرب منهم نبشوا عن صاحبنا. It says when he left their religion, they came and they dug up his grave. Because he left the religion, they came and dug up our companion's grave and brought him out of the grave and left his body out in the dirt. فألقوه فحفروا له فأعمقوا. It says, and so they took his body, they placed it back into the grave, they dug the hole deeper, and then it repeats the story several times. Okay. And then in the final, it says that وَأْمَقُوا لَهُ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَا اسْتَطَاعُوا, that they dug him as far down into the earth as they could possibly go after all of these instances of, burying him, his body spit out, burying him, body spit out. They kept saying, this is Muhammad and his companions. And so they finally leave. It says here that they فَعَمِلُوا أَنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنَ النَّاسِ فَأَلْقَوْهُ. And so, when they had dug it all the way down, the deepest that they could possibly do it, and they still found his body spit up from the earth, they then said, they said this, they came to know that this had to be, had nothing to do with human beings, and so they left his body there. And I think that this particular narration is kind of like, it's supposed to be like an ibra, like a lesson, in that if you leave Islam, this is what happens to you. That this individual who used to write for Muhammad, he used to write the truth for Muhammad, and it got to the point that even the earth wouldn't accept him. And I have questions about this hadith myself as I started to read it later on. Like, well, what happened to his body? Like, did he just rot there? Did dogs come and take his bones away? Like, the narrators don't even tell us what happens, the aftermath, right? It's just guesswork that you're left to. Nice. The next scholar that I want to draw attention to is a Tabari. And Tabari, he goes into great lengths. And so I'm just going to touch on minor points of what he's saying, just the gist, because he goes into some great detail here. As you can see, I couldn't fit it all, but this is most of what he says about the hadith, rather about the ayat, and uses the various hadith that talk about verse 103 of Surah An-Nahl. And so I've summarized here. He says that this is mentioning several slaves and a companion. And he says that it's in reference to a slave by the name of Bala'am. And then he gives another narration of a slave named Ya'ish, and then another one named Jabr, and then another one named Yasar, and then another one, and then he talks about, the companion Salman al-Farisi. And interestingly, Salman al-Farisi is only mentioned by Tabari to show that himself, and we're also going to hear from Ibn Kathir, they bring this to show that some people were saying that this ayat is in reference to Salman al-Farisi. But Tabari and Ibn Kathir reject this because they say that Surah An-Nahl and verse 103 in particular is a ayat Makkiyah, that it was revealed in Mecca. And Salman al-Farisi is as well known in his hadith where he talks about how he converted to al-Islam. This happened in Medina. And so this verse could not be referring to him. And so he rejects that idea. And then the sixth person he mentions is the scribe that we just read from al-Bukhari. And so these are the names that we're going to see in the other accounts of the other scholars of hadith and tafsir. Al-Baghawi gives some interesting information here. And he says that the scholars differ about who the Bashar is referring to in this verse. And he says that there was a Christian slave in Mecca from the non-Arabs, and his name was Bala'am. Okay, and so this name is going to pop up a lot. And Al-Baghawi says that this is the culprit. This is the individual who's being spoken about. Ikramah says, on the other hand, that it's a young man from the Banu al-Mughira, and his name was Ya'ish, and that he used to recite in front of Muhammad. While Abdullah ibn Muslim al-Hadrami, he says that he had two slaves. One was named Yasar, and he had the kunya of Abu Fakiha. And then there was another slave named Jabr. and they both used to make swords in Mecca, and they recited the Torah and the Gospels. And whenever Muhammad would pass by them, he would stop and listen to them recite. And then lastly, al-Dhahak, according to al-Baghawi, he says that whenever Muhammad was harmed by the Quraysh, the disbelievers in Mecca, he would retreat and he would go off to where both of these men were, and he would sit and listen to them reciting. And this is what prompted the Quraysh to say that Muhammad learned from them, both of them. Now, Al-Wahidi is where I first came to know of all of these, and then I later went to see what the other scholars of Hadith and Tafsir said about this. And we have the same information from Abdullah bin Muslim al-Hadrami, where he's talking about these two Christians that were from the people of Ain al-Tamar. And he mentions Yasar and Jabr. And he says that they would recite these religious books in their mother tongue while the Prophet was passing by them, and he would listen to them. And then the Quraysh prompted themselves, they said, he's learning from both of them. And then Muhammad writes this verse to refute that idea that he's being influenced by Yasar and Jabr. This is interesting for me because when I read it, I thought, well, the only problem with that is that the verse specifically says, إِنَّمَا يُعَلِّمُهُ Bashar. And it's not in the dual form, it's in the singular form. And so for me, language-wise, it couldn't have been two, it had to be one. But the name dropping of Yasar and Jabr, I think, is still interesting, even though it really doesn't fit with the way that Muhammad constructed the verse. Now, Al-Qurtubi, there's several points that I want to talk about. He says the slave is named Jabr, and he belonged to Al-Faqih ibn al-Mughira, and he was a Christian and then converted to Islam. And so now we get a more detail about Jabr. And Naqash, who was his owner, and Naqash, who's one of the narrators, says that his owner used to beat him, and he would say to him, "You're the one who's teaching Muhammad." And Jabr would say, "No, by Allah, he teaches me and he guides me." So kind of deflecting and saying that Muhammad is the one who's teaching me, not me teaching Muhammad, because that would have been a horrible thing, him informing Muhammad and giving Muhammad these ideas that are separating the Quraysh and the community. The other narrations are all similar except for one which claims that it was Bal'am, who was a Christian living in Mecca, and he used to recite the Torah, while another states that his name was Abu Maysira, who spoke the Roman language. And that would probably explain why there are some Latin words in the Quran. For example, we have, even in the Fatiha, we have Sirat. In the Qira'at of Khalaf, it's Zirat. And even Sirat, one is a sin and the other is a Sad. And there are other words as well that appear in the Quran that are of Latin origin that have been looked at. I mean, that's doesn't take away from the Quran itself. I'm not saying that because those foreign words exist, that doesn't mean that they're not Arabic words in themselves. It just speaks to the idea of, language evolution and the proof of that language evolution existing in the time of Muhammad. What I also found interesting from Al-Qurtubi, he tells us that the verse used to be recited in another way as well, and it used to be recited yalhaduna instead of yulhiduna. And for those who are familiar with ilm al-sarf, the word yulhiduna, they know, is from al-hada yulhidu ilhadan. And this is coincidentally where we get the word mulhid, which is synonymous with the word murtad. But to see that it had a different variant, yalhaduna, that's interesting because yalhaduna and yulhiduna have different implications, even though in this case it probably could mean the same thing. I just find that interesting from the aspect of, well, which one is in the lahu mafud, yalhaduna or yulhiduna? I guess that's something to think about. Ibn Kathir, getting to Ibn Kathir now, he also brings some interesting information here. Excuse me. He says, it's a foreigner from Rome who used to sell goods at Safa. And either he knew no Arabic or he knew enough to converse with Muhammad. He was a Christian slave that belonged to the Banu al-Hadrami. There seems to still be some consistency here. And Muhammad used to sit and visit him frequently. And interestingly, also in another narration, his name is Balgham instead of Bal'am. So instead of an ayn, we have a ghain here. And Al-Dhahak insists that this verse is in reference to Salman al-Farisi. But as I mentioned about At-Tabari, Ibn Kathir also rejects this view because of the same understanding that it is an ayat Makkiyah and not an ayat Madaniyah. And then lastly, for Ibn Kathir, Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib says that this foreigner accepted Islam and he used to write the Quran for Muhammad, and then he apostated and made up the allegation that Muhammad learned from him. So you can see what's going on here, this back and forth with these two, this little rivalry going on with the scribe of the Prophet and the Quraysh and everybody else. And then lastly, As-Suyuti, he brings a narration from Ibn Jarir, and it said that the sanad is da'if, that the isnad is weak. And I've always held the position, even if it's weak, that it exists in the Muslim literature for me is enough. And he says that the Messenger of Allah knew a man in Mecca by the name of Bal'am. It says, I want to read the Arabic here because there's something that's going to lead us into something that I'm going to be talking about in regards to paraphrasing. It says, كان رسول الله يعلم موقنا بمكة اسمه بلعام وكان عجمي اللسان وكان المشركون يرون رسول الله يدخل عليه ويخرج من عنده. And he says he was a foreigner who spoke a foreign language. The polytheists, the Quraysh, used to see the Messenger of Allah go to him. فقالوا, and they said, إنما يعلمه بلعام. No one teaches him but Bal'am. فأنزل الله al-Ayat. So then Allah revealed 103, which we know means that Muhammad wrote this verse. So pay attention to what is said here. فَقَالُوا إِنَّمَا يُعَلِّمُهُ بَلْعَامٌ. And so they said, no one teaches him but Bal'am. We're going to see this wording again. It's interesting that exact wording exists in the Quran with a slight difference. Now, this prompts me to talk about Ibn Qumta, and I had wanted to find where Ibn Qumta fits into all of this with the 7 scholars of Hadith and Tafsir, but unfortunately was not able to find anything. So I thought, well, I'll just talk about what I have here. And I believe this is, I want to say this is from Wiki Islam. And it's something that I was never able to find the Arabic for. So let me just read it and maybe add some commentary. So it says, this Christian who taught Muhammad is not named in the Sahih Hadiths. However, Ibn Waraq, citing Waqidi, names him as Ibn Qumta. This is an interesting name. Al-Waqidi, who died in 207 after Hijrah, or 823 of Common Era, says that a Christian slave named Ibn Qumta was the amanuensis. Hold on, this is like a Fustian word for scribe, but it means a amanuensis of the Prophet, along with a certain Abdullah ibn Sa'ad ibn Abi Sar. And I talked about Abdullah in a previous video, so if you want to go back to that, you can venture into that particular area, who reported that it was only a Christian slave who was teaching Muhammad. I used to write to him and change whatever I wanted. So you notice there's more than one person who's making these claims. Regardless who this foreigner who taught Muhammad was, it is clear that this highly specific charge was leveled against Muhammad, and he revealed the aforementioned verse to deflect it. That this foreigner existed is real. The Quran itself alluded to him by saying, the tongue of him at whom they hint is a non-Arab. Why would Muhammad say this? He admits there was someone who taught him whose tongue was not Arabic. I tend to agree here with what's being said. That this foreigner taught Muhammad the Judeo-Christian tales is alluded to when one follows Muhammad's apologetic against this complaint in Surah 16. What follows in Quran 16:103, it's Surah An-Nahl, what we've been talking about, is Muhammad talking how Allah revealed the religion of Abraham, the resurrection, the everlasting life, judgment day, prohibition of meat of swine and non-halal slaughter, and other practices given to the Jews. In short, verse 16, verse 103 to 104 of chapter 16 is nothing more than Muhammad's attempt to answer the charge that he learned the Jewish Christian religion from a foreigner, probably Jabr. Notice they slip in Jabr. So I'm glad we have some context for this. He was the Muslim who first came up with the excuse that the similarities between the Judeo-Christian religion and the Quran are due to the three scriptures sharing the same source, which he named as Allah. Thus, it is evident that Muhammad heard Judeo-Christian tales from various sources, beginning with Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail, and from Waraka ibn Nufal ibn Asad ibn Abdul Izzah, to Jabr and the unnamed Christian of Sahih al-Bukhari. This is profound for me because I really want to find more information. If anybody in the comment section or anyone wants to email me information about Ibn Qumta, preferably in Arabic, but I'll take English as well. Even if you have anything in Spanish, that would be great. I would really like to follow up on this and find that source from Waqidi just to see how it's worded and kind of fit it in with what we've been talking about here with these various slaves that used to inform Muhammad, or the other allegation that is the other way around, that Muhammad informed them. And then just even for myself personally, make some connections with Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh, because I think that's also interesting. Again, it's like a template of a story that's applied to all these different people. And there could only be one unless there were more than one, right? How many apostate scribes did he have? And why were they leaving Islam? One wonders. So with all of that context, and let me just kill this, please. Oh, that's nice. With all of this context now, we looked at the linguistic aspect of the verse and talked about some areas of looking at the Quran and indulging, I guess, in my own personal tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran. And then we looked at some of the statements of the Sunni ulama in regards to this issue of Asbaab and Nuzool. And I think after getting all of that context, we can go back to the verse itself in those areas. And for me, this is the way I reread the verse now with all of that context. And this is something that I like to do a lot. I like to, in my masahif and some of the Qur'ans that I have where I write notes in it, I usually like to rewrite a verse by going back to the reference that are ambiguous and then filling it in with whatever information we're given from the Asbaab works or other books of tafsir. So for me, this is a better revised rendering of the ayah to remove, what's ambiguous here, what's not clear. And this is the way I rendered it. وَلَقَدْ نَحْنُ اللَّهُ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّهُمَ الْقُرَيْشُ يَقُولُونَ إِنَّمَا يُعَلِّمُ بَلْعَامُ مُحَمَّدًا لسان الذي يلهدون إلى بلعام عجمي وهذا لسان عربي مبين, which I would translate as, indeed, we Allah know that they, the Quraysh, say that Bal'am has taught him, Muhammad, the tongue of Bal'am they refer to as foreign. Well, this is a clear Arabic tongue. And I think that makes a lot more sense. Now, if you disagree with Bal'am, you could put in the servant of your choice. If you want to put in Jabr, you want to put Yasar, Abu Fakiha, whoever you want to put, from what we just covered, put it in. Don't put in Salman al-Farsi because it won't work here. That's just a joke. But everybody else that we talked about could fit in here. And it still wouldn't change the fact that there is this issue of Muhammad acknowledging an outside source, but deflecting, as it said, or denying any influence. So this brings us to the last part of number 6. And this is important here for me. And it's this phenomenon of paraphrasing. And paraphrasing throughout the Quran is what really started to give me more insight into the idea of the Quran is very big among the Salafis and even among Sufis and others. Al-Quran, Kalamullah, غير مخلوق, that the Quran is the speech of Allah, it's not created. And some have been added onto that. If you read some of the books of Aqidah, they'll say in the Mutun of Al-Aqidah, they'll say something like, فَالَّذِي هُوَ يَقُولَ أَنَ الْقُرْآنَ مَخْلُوق فَهُوَ كَافِرٌ. And the one who says that the Quran is created, then he is a disbeliever. And so what I wanted to give here the viewers is a visual of the way we see here where Muhammad hears something that he doesn't like, that upsets him, that frustrates him. I mean, he believes he's a prophet. He believes Allah's talking to him, and people are not believing him. And so what we have is a prime example of how he responds using the language to either address allegations or to even respond or to even insult, as we see many times that he does do that. And that's a perfect example. We saw in As-Suyuti the exact wording of إِنَّمَا يُعَلِّمُ بَلْعَامٍ. Now, we know these are words of the Quraysh, but we don't know who exactly said this. Is it Abu Jahl? Is it Abu Lahab? Is it Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira? Who from among the adversaries of Muhammad said this? And the scholars of Hadith and Tafsir, they don't tell us who these exact words come from. No one teaches him but Bala'am. But Muhammad hears this and he internalizes it and he reacts. And he reacts with not mentioning the name of who he's accused of being influenced by, but rather just a human being. And this is something that Muhammad does a lot in the Quran. إِنَّمَا يُعَلِّمُهُ Bashar. So he totally just leaves out the name so that the name will never be remembered. It's just a human being. And that's unique because there are some instances where Muhammad, he uses the names. I mean, Zayd is mentioned in the Quran. He's probably the only companion mentioned by name. And I think Abu Lahab is also mentioned, the only other one from his enemies mentioned. Everybody else is just referred to as pronouns or some kind of synonymous word for that individual, right? And those are the words of Muhammad in paraphrase form. The Quran is filled with many examples where Muhammad paraphrases the words of his adversaries or what he hears from the people of the book, and then he restructures them and then gives these verses that have a referent instead of the actual name of the individual. And that's fine. This is what we do in language. We use reference in that way, so it's not repetitive, or because we don't want to include the name of somebody specific, so we refer to them in using a referent. And so there's just 2 points here for me on this, and I'll be talking more about the phenomenon of paraphrasing as I get more into the Quran being created or uncreated, depending on your viewpoint. This is a perfect example here in this slide where we see how Muhammad paraphrases the words and others into his Quran. And this also, for me, proves that Muhammad didn't plagiarize the Quran. He paraphrased it instead. I just don't hold to that view that he plagiarized. He paraphrased, did a lot of paraphrasing, and he was pretty good at it. And so were many of the Arabs of his time. Many were able to articulate whatever they heard or saw and restructure it and paraphrase it in a way that made it exciting and new to the people that were listening. You got to remember the Arabs were very eloquent, like many other of the non-Arabs who were eloquent from many of the world literatures that we have today. I mean, it's not excluded just to the Arabs. So we end with some benefits from the Asbaab. I want to talk about 3 that come to mind here. That first one is that the author of the Quran is appealing to a group of outsiders who are of the conviction that Muhammad was informed by outside sources, This is most likely true given the similarities of the Quran with other Abrahamic texts. Using tafsir bil-ma'thur, which is interpretation by the prophetic traditions, the tafsir and the hadith scholars give several probable accounts, albeit we see some contradictions that acknowledge an outside source and influence. That definitely comes through. And then lastly, the Quran is filled with instances where Muhammad paraphrases the words of his opponents, therefore making it, and I mean here I'm using a referent, the Quran, the speech of others and not kalamullah, not the actual speech of Allah. And there we have it. That is number 6. Next time, we'll be doing readings from Asbaab and Nuzool from the works of Al-Wahidi, the top 10 most interesting hadith, and I will go into number 5. And so until the next video, everyone, please stay gold.